tell you what a relief it's been to have a noble friend in the House at last. It makes a huge difference to the number of things, the number of issues that we can cover and the number of bills that we can be involved in. We're both determined to abolish the House of Lords as it is at the moment, and we both want a fully elected chamber. A few years ago, I put down a bill on this, and Natalie has put down the same bill last year, so we are working towards that. It's worth remembering as well about the House of Lords. A lot of people think we're an anachronism and we're fairly useless, and I would argue that with a government majority of 80+ in the Commons, we are actually the main opposition to the government. It's where a lot of issues that just don't get discussed or debated in the Commons do get aired very fully. And we are also pretty good. We have a lot of experts. We're very good at amending some of the dreadful legislation that comes through from the Commons. It's so badly written. Natalie and I liaise with Caroline Lucas's and her office as much as possible. It's quite interesting just how much the procedures between the two houses differ. And so sometimes we can't work together on an issue because it just doesn't work out, but we maintain good relations. Bills are treated differently between the two houses. In the Commons, for example, the Speaker has a lot more power. In the House of Lords, we're able to introduce a lot more amendments quite freely, and we debate slightly differently. Natalie and I both work with other political parties and with crossbenchers. I have found in the past that amendments with Tory backbenchers, my name and their name, can be extremely successful. It slightly scares the government and they come to us to talk and negotiate. At the moment, the House is 777 peers, although that's a moving figure because although the number of people coming in has slowed, people do die and they do resign. And so the number varies quite a lot. The Tories have got 243 members, which makes them the biggest party, the biggest group. But they're outnumbered by the fact that we have crossbench 179. They are people who, they're the experts quite often, whether they've been 40 years in education or the arts or medicine or the law. The lawyers are very useful. And the Labour group is only 177 people. And Lib Dems are outrageously oversubscribed in having 90 members, and bishops have 25. There's about 200 women in the House, so we're about the same as the House of Commons. We're operating at the moment with a virtual system, which is that we can do everything virtually. It is a little bit, we also have virtual voting, of course, remote voting. It is a little bit limiting in that we can only have a certain number of people speaking in any big bill. We're limited to 80. And for example, in the agriculture bill that's coming through at the moment, there were well over 120 peers who wanted to speak. And on that bill particularly, I know that's of real concern to Greens. It is amazing just how much fury there is across the House, even on the Tory benches, about the potential for lowering our food standards with filthy, dirty USA, very low animal welfare standards. And so that's going to be a quite interesting debate. We've had one debate already and it's coming up again next week. We also work a lot with NGOs, non-governmental organisations like Liberty, like Greener UK, and they often supply us with amendments that we put. And what the Greens try to do is always pick up the amendments that the other parties won't take because they're too radical. And we try to make sure that the debate is widened in that way, so that the biggest range of ideas is put forward. We've got, as I said, agriculture at the moment, and fisheries is going through the fisheries bill, but of course we've got coming up agriculture, environment and trade, and there's going to be a lot of strong debate in well, hopefully both houses on that. And then we also have some smaller bills which look quite boring, quite trivial, but actually they are quite important simply because the government is embedding in some of those bills stronger ministerial powers, which mean that they can bypass Parliament. And what we've seen already with the Coronavirus Act, the Act was passed on the last day that the House of Lords sat, and then the very next day, the government introduced new powers of all kinds, particularly for the police, which meant that, that they could have put them in the day before and had debate, but because we were in recess, we couldn't debate them. And those statutory instruments keep coming through. And just this week, we debated a statutory instrument that was introduced 3 weeks before, more than 3 weeks before. So you can see that the government is sidelining Parliament. And actually what we're starting to get, what with the embedded ministerial powers and the statutory instruments that are debated so late, we're starting to get a government by diktat, which of course is highly undemocratic. In a time of emergency, you can understand a government wanting to be able to introduce things quickly. But the fact is, Parliament is sitting now, and all these things could be debated before they happen. One idea is to actually have a compendium of moves that the government could make, and then they draft compendium, and then they could just draw from that. But the government is choosing instead to just make it up as they go along, which is quite disturbing for us who feel that democracy is the way that we want to live in this country. It is extremely disturbing, and all the more so because the Coronavirus Act did introduce a lot of powers for the police, which we have, what we've seen is that the law is never actually followed through by the guidance and the advice. And in fact, quite often when the press briefings were taking place or ministers answering questions in other places, they seemed to just make it up again, that they were saying, oh, you can't do this or you can do that. And actually that wasn't what the law said. And this has not helped, I think, the public, but also, and here's a moment of generosity from me towards the police, it didn't help the police because they were confused as well. So we've seen instances of the police doing just some incredibly stupid things, like trying to stop people sitting outside their front doors. And I'm afraid some of that is down to the government's fault in not making it very, very clear about what the law actually was. Now, obviously, these days we are watched and information is collected in all sorts of ways, completely beyond our control. We have no idea about the information that's being held on various databases. But when it comes to policing, we sort of expect them to operate within the law. And part of the problem has been that the law cannot keep up with new developments in technology. And we've seen this again and again. And for example, the police have been using automated facial recognition. And this is where they just set up cameras and they scan for people in the crowd who've broken the law. Now, unfortunately, there is no oversight of this, no independent oversight, and there is no regulation. So actually, here we are, the police are making it up as well. And what we found is, of course, that they make mistakes, they make a lot of mistakes. They've also started adding people who are missing into the database. So when they scan a crowd, they're not just scanning for criminals, they're scanning for other people. And this is an infringement of our human rights to be able to go freely if we're not committing crimes. And it has struck me that some of the schedules under the Coronavirus Act actually had to start to be now withdrawn and actually taken out of commission. And one of these, well, two of the schedules, 21 and 22, actually they give the police the right to forcibly remove, to detain, to test, to isolate people without their permission. And that applies to children as well, which strikes me as extremely repressive, dangerously repressive policing when we don't have the oversight, when we don't have enough parliamentary democratic control of the police. And in fact, the Met Police Commissioner is agitating for more powers. She wants stronger powers for the police. She's not just suggesting it, she is lobbying government ministers and the Mayor of London for more powers. And the only thing I can say is that when you have Greens in any form of government, they will fight that sort of repressive action. And so Sian Berry and Caroline Russell on the London Assembly will be fighting it, and will be fighting it in Parliament. I'm happy to take questions on any of that.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That's really helpful. I'm hoping some questions are coming in from the chat room. I can see a number of people have raised the issue that obviously that an elected House of Lords would be a much better option, obviously as long as it was elected under proportional representation, which I think is a given in party policy. There's an interesting question here that someone has written to their MP in Colchester, Will Quince, and he has said that all EU food protection will be maintained. Was he lying? Well, there's a good question.
Yeah, that was me. I mean, I can quote you directly from his letter. I've got it in front of me, and if you just give me a sec.
Okay.
Can I answer the thing about the elected House of Lords?
By all means, what he finds this, yes.
Yes, one option that we have put in our bill is that we also have this contingent of experts. So, I mean, there is already a term for them, people's peers. We have a few every couple of years who are introduced by a committee that we have. They choose people based on their experience and their expertise. And so we would need that sort of contingent, because the crossbenchers do play such an incredibly important part in our lawmaking, in our debates.
So I'm hoping I'm going to get some of these questions sent through to me. Right,
On the food,
I've got one from Anne Kelly. Yeah, Jenny, any particular actions that we could all be taking at the moment about police powers? In particular, she's worried about facial recognition software.
well, this is one of the slight pluses of the coronavirus, of course, because we can all wear masks now, and actually we're being encouraged to wear masks. So that sort of does stop automated facial recognition from being quite so intrusive. I mean, it's the first time I've ever used a mask in public. Things that you can do. One thing, for example, is to have a few basic bits of knowledge about what the police can do and what they can't. And I would recommend an organisation called NetPol, which watches the police with an eagle eye, and also Big Brother Watch. They are absolutely brilliant. And there's a bit of advice about dispersal. When the police ask you to disperse, for example, at a rally or something, they can only ask you to do that legally if members of the public in the area are being harassed, alarmed or distressed. Well, they can say they are, or you see crime and disorder in their area. But the absolutely crucial thing is, if you see a group of young black people being harassed by the police, step in and have a quiet chat. I talk to a lot of people, academics particularly, who are advising how the police should move forward into this new era. And the one I like particularly, Clifford Stott, is saying that dialogue is always the answer with the police. That's something the police have to learn.
Thanks, Jenny. And I've got a number of questions coming in who are asking about, is it worth writing to and contacting members of the House of Lords? Is it worth members of the public raising political issues directly with them?
It's always more difficult because we have such a large contingent of crossbenchers. They think for themselves, and so some of them are quite Tory, others are quite left-wing. For example, amongst the crossbenchers, we've got people like Rosie Boycott and John Bird, and then we have previous High Court judges and or independent reviewers of counter-terrorism. We've got a huge range. So it's a moot point about whether it's worth lobbying members of the House of Lords on a particular issue. I would argue it has to be very targeted. And for example, on the agriculture bill and the issue of lower standard American food imports, there's a huge anger across the House, and that's going to be something that many people from all parties and the crossbenchers are going to resist. And so that will, I would argue, I would think, be one of the amendments that we will put to the agriculture bill. I think on balance, you might be better lobbying MPs, and something that I experience is lobbying by people send me letters that they're, you know, they're whichever interest organisation they're from, that it's a standard letter. Standard letters don't really work because I can just write a 1 or 2 word reply and send that to everybody. It actually is better if you write personally. MPs always get disturbed by letters from constituents. So MPs, yes. House of Lords, perhaps. I mean, Natalie and I could perhaps let the party know if there's an issue or some people we think you should write to.
Getting quite a few more questions coming in now.
Can I ask a question about the food?
Yes. Okay,
yeah,
go
sorry,
on.
yeah, just if you just let me find, yeah, here it goes. Okay, so Will Quint on the 11th of June writes, the EU Withdrawal Act will transfer all existing EU food safety provisions, including existing import requirements, onto the UK statute books. These import standards include a ban on artificial growth hormones in domestic and imported products, and set out, and this is a bit about chlorinated chicken, set out that no products other than water are approved to decontaminate poultry carcasses. So, what, I mean, but other people are saying we're going to get chlorinated chicken.
Well, obviously, laws can be amended. That's the problem. So we have indeed moved over all that EU safety standard legislation, but the government can change it. That's the basic problem, and you know, but the things I've explained, you know, their majority and their sneakiness in putting all these ministerial powers in means that they can do it.
All right, I've got 2 or 3 other questions lined up. One is from Ollie Inwell King in West Suffolk. Sorry, yeah, around Bury St Edmunds, and is asking, do you have any comments on the fact that most people simply don't understand how the House of Lords works?
It's infuriating. It's absolutely, you know, from my point of view, having in the 6 years, I've done a huge amount of work, and now with Natalie, we're doing exponentially more work, and yet people just don't understand. It's one of the features of our British way of life that we think of the House of Lords as a bunch of old fogies, and to some extent that's true. But at the same time, if you listened to a debate that you were interested in, I think you'd be staggered by the amount of knowledge and passion that you get in debates. And it's not just from the Greens, it's from all around the House. I mean, the only amendments I've ever got through on a few issues has been with a Tory backbencher and a Labour backbencher and a crossbencher. And together, when you get that sort of unity, you know, the government does negotiate.
I'm having a number of comments regarding the first question, which was about an elected second chamber. A number of comments about people suggesting, wouldn't it be better to look at other alternatives such as the Citizens' Assembly or sortition? And I wonder how you feel about that.
I think Citizens' Assembly are excellent, and that's certainly an option. It's not the option that we put forward, but it's for the Green Party to decide these things. You know, Natalie and I follow Green Party policy wherever we can. And I say wherever we can because occasionally, and I find particularly in policing, we sometimes don't have enough policy. And so, you know, there have been times when I've just extrapolated from current policy. Sure,
yeah. And also, are the statutory powers that you mentioned for the police purely time framed around the pandemic, or are they going to last for longer?
Well, this is one of the questions, because what the government's doing at the moment is it has to renew statutory instruments at a certain time period. So it is, but the fear is that the government and the police can get used to these powers and start again getting confused about what is allowed and what isn't. And when you've got the public and the police confused, you're in a very difficult position. The CPS has undertaken to look at all prosecutions that were made under the Coronavirus Act, because they think that there were a lot of mistakes, and they're even going to do it for people who pleaded guilty. And then there's the question of fines as well. Some of the fines were absolutely ludicrous. They're handed out, they're immediate. There's no option to query or challenge them at all. And some of those, hundreds and possibly over 1,000, were actually utterly unlawful. Plus, of course, the discrimination, the ethnic balance was totally awry. So, if you were black, you were more likely to get fined or prosecuted than if you weren't.
I'm picking up on something that Adrian Holmes from Norwich has said, where this debate about a fully elected second house, I saw some people earlier saying, but wouldn't we lose expertise and experts? And he's saying, can't those people simply be called to give evidence in committees, etc.?
Yeah, of course they could. But in a committee, only a certain number of people hear them. And quite honestly, having those experts embedded in the House, I mean, this is within our bill. Having those experts in the House really helps. You can see that people are swayed when a QC like David Panic stands up and argues. I mean, sometimes they're swayed the wrong way, but our bill does include that option of having independent voices.
Right, and the final thing, I'm looking here at a question on policing from Jamie Osborne of Norwich. I've seen Jenny talk about the need for trust-based policing systems. Can you explain exactly what that would look like? And would we be aiming to replace current policing system with something like that? And he says that's particularly important in the ward where he's a councillor, where policing is a dominant issue.
Right. If you could get in touch with me, I'd love to be in touch with you about that, if policing is an issue in your ward. My email address is jonesjb@parliament.uk. This isn't my idea. This is an idea put forward by a lot of academics who actually research how the police can be more effective. And the fact is, the police talking to whoever it is, whether it's to local residents or to groups of young kids on corners, this is a more effective way to actually get intelligence and also to encourage observance of the law. A trust-based system would be with a minimum amount of police officers. I mean, personally, I'd like to see a nation, a globe where the police weren't necessary at all, where we all operated cooperatively and kindly. I can't see that happening anytime soon. So in the meantime, my focus is to attempt to limit the power of the police and encourage better behaviour from them, whether it's less racism or less misogyny, which happens quite a lot with rape cases, for example. So I'm operating with the system that we've got at the moment with a brighter thought for the future.